Okay, firstly, very good evening and a very warm welcome to today's economy class. Thank you for joining in. So in today's session, we'll talk about two concepts, two topics in economics, fiscal policy and national income accounting. But before that, I'll just give a quick introduction to the very basics of economics and some glimpses into how it affects our day-to-day life. With that, I'll get started. Please feel free to stop me if you have any questions or you want me to pause for anything. Please feel free to come on audio and express your thoughts. Okay. Economics in day-to-day life. So firstly, economics is not a standalone subject, right? This is something you will see in your day-to-day life. You will see economics around you. Uh, with the study of the subject of economy, we will be able to better appreciate the subject with what's going on around us in our family, within our economy, in a state, in a country, in the global economy. We will be able to appreciate those contexts, those topics in the context of each of these. Let's start with few day-to-day examples. Do we all observe that vegetables cost more with every passing year? We keep complaining about tomato prices going up, onion prices going up. Why is this happening? What's causing this? Who is controlling this? Is there any regulation around it? Yes. So the economics topic of inflation helps us understand why this even happens, right? And what the central government of every country does when inflation goes beyond a point or becomes uncontrollable. What is their role in controlling inflation? So this is how you connect your day-to-day life with real economic concepts. Another example, we all observed how the facial masks we were wearing during COVID shot up, right? The prices became 2x, 3x, 4x. Why? That's just a simple cloth, a piece of material, right? Which we probably didn't even use before COVID, right? But we saw the prices really shot up, really increased after COVID. Cab fares. Let's just take common examples. When after heavy rains, don't we all observe that it's really tough to find a cab, to find commute, or even if we find a cab, apps show the price to be 2x, two times the price or three times the normal prices. Why does all this happen? This all offshoots from economic concepts of demand and supply, right? When there is demand, we had never seen this unprecedented demand for masks before COVID, right? During COVID, we saw there was a huge demand. So understanding the mechanics of demand and supply will help us appreciate why the price of masks had to go up. Delivery platforms hiring gig workers. We all use delivery platforms, right? Like Zomato, Uber, Ola, so many more, right? They hire temporary workers. We've been reading in the news recently about how they're trying to not have a time for them. They're generally having to deliver within 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. They're trying to regulate all of that, but that's another topic. But how does their employment even work? How do they manage to hire so many contract laborers? How do they manage to hire so many workers who help with these platforms? This then forms part of a larger topic in economics called employment, and within that, something called informal employment. GST, we know it's replaced the earlier VAT, service tax. It was all consolidated into something called GST. Right now, even if you go to a supermarket or you go to a store, you observe that there is GST on the bill. That's when we begin to appreciate how government uses taxes as a tool to collect revenue. What does government do with taxes? All that we will understand. Monthly household budget. Don't we all write budget at home? We write whatever expenses we've incurred for the month. What are our frequently incurred expenses? So when you do it for a family, for a household, for a small household, that is also economics. When the government does it for the country, it's macroeconomics, right? So as we begin to appreciate these small concepts at home, we will be able to translate economics into the bigger picture, right? We'll be able to understand fiscal discipline, how government allocates resources, home loan interest rates. This is something which is what we keep reading in the papers. Recently, we saw that home loan interest rates have fallen. This is a very, 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 very relevant concept for us, right? A lot of us need home loans. We want to purchase a new home. We want to purchase, and if we don't have the funds for that, how do we manage it? By way of home loans. So it's really important for us to understand the existing interest rates, how much they impact our purchase decision. So all this comes under the policy of the central government, right? How RBI, or our central government, uses interest rates to influence the economy. We all buy imported goods, right? Excuse me. Like we all have iPhones, we all travel abroad. What is the impact of rupee depreciation on all of these foreign services? All of this becomes relevant as we try to understand rupee depreciation, inflation, forex, right? So what we're trying to tell here is economics is vast. There are so many topics, but you shouldn't see this as a standalone subject. It is very much connected with our day-to-day life. I'll take a quick pause here if anybody has questions or thoughts. Excuse me. Okay. Economics is not just about numbers, right? What do we mean by that? So often we see a lot of statistics, we see a lot of percentages, we see huge figures being presented in our newspapers, even when we are studying the subject, right? But is that economics? No. Economics helps us understand and appreciate the numbers. If we say India has grown from 3% to 6%, that's not what we're trying to convey here. Why has India grown? What has contributed to India's growth story? What are the sectoral, or which sectors have contributed to India's growth? What does India invest in? That's what we're interested to know. When we understand these economic concepts, it helps us understand and appreciate statistics better. We then understand, oh, all of this, a huge contributor. How has sectoral moved from agriculture to service sector? How much of FDI we now invite, how much of foreign inflow of funds we get. So when we understand all of that, this doesn't become just numbers. We're able to connect how the economy is growing to what we understand. So in this context, we'll be studying, these are just a few topics here, but we'll be studying about budget, inflation, GDP, central bank, many more topics. But all of these central concepts will help us understand statistics. What we read in the newspaper, we're not going to get into the details of this particular article, it's just for an example, but it's really important to connect current affairs with what we learn in economics. This is just a floating example, but it talks about how during the recent depreciation of Indian currency, of INR, RBI, our central government, came in, intervened, and they were able to stabilize it. But what does it mean when we look at the paper? Oh, we've experienced depreciation in the Indian rupee, which we have not seen in many decades. What do we understand from that? It might just look like numbers on the sheet, right? But when we begin to understand concepts like forex market, depreciation of currency, inflation, cross-border transactions, that's when we will be able to appreciate such articles. So economics is also about connecting whatever we know with what we read in the newspaper. And of course, in the context of UPSC, it's going to be a very, very relevant task to basically keep yourself updated with current affairs and also to connect it with the different concepts we'll be talking about in class. Economy versus economics. So sometimes we hear these terms. How different are they? Just give you a small example to understand. So economy is basically the state. right? What is it? What is the current state? That you have lesser control on the economy. It behaves in a particular way. Economics is the study or the analysis of what is happening. As an example, weather. Can we control weather? Can we decide to have a cooler day? Can we decide to have a hotter day? No, weather is what it is. That is economy. As an example, right? It is the state of affairs. What is economics? When we begin to analyze weather, we have weather predictors. That's why we have the meteorology department. The Met department tells us, oh, we forecast rains for the next 3 to 4 days. It looks cloudy around this time. The cyclone is likely to pass. So when you study it in detail, that's when it translates into economics, right? We just spoke a few minutes back about vegetable prices rising, right? When we see it in the newspapers, when we come to class, we discuss about why are tomato prices rising? What were the recent events that contributed to that? That is economics. Economy is inflation that's out there. What is economics? When we discuss it, when we analyze it, we add a layer, that becomes economics. So I'll conclude the introduction part here. Economics is basically making choices when resources are limited. You have limited resources. For example, you get your first salary. You have a wish list. You have so many things to do. But then you make your choices, right? These are my priorities. This is the first thing I want to do. So with limited resources, how efficiently you manage is economy. You do it for yourself. You do it for your house. When the government does it for the entire country, that becomes large-scale economics, right? But whether it's micro or macro, it's all intertwined. It's all based on our day-to-day life choices and what we see. With that, I'll kind of conclude the introduction part, and let's move on to the first topic for today, fiscal policy. I'll just pause here for a couple of seconds. Anybody has any questions or just any thoughts to share? Excuse me. Okay. So I'll take that as a yes, that you're following me.
No,
Yes, sorry, who's that?
no, ma'am, it's going good, ma'am.
Oh,
Understanding.
thank you. Thank you for the confirmation. Really appreciate it. Okay. Now we'll move on to the first topic for today, fiscal policy. What is fiscal policy? Very, very, very important part of our policy making. We often see it in the newspaper. But what is it about? Government uses taxation and spending to influence the economy. Now, what do you mean by taxation? Taxation is government's revenue. When you go to a store, right, you buy clothes, you buy provisions. At the end, you see taxes being levied, right? Where do those taxes go? Goes to the government, because government needs revenue. It needs money to make expenditures, to spend for the economy, right? You earn income, you earn salary, you sell an asset, you make money, but you have to pay taxes, correct? All these taxes go to the government. This is all form of government's revenue, right? So how government uses that revenue to spend? Why would government spend? Only when government spends for the economy, country will grow. For example, government decides to build schools, hospitals, right? It does manufactures machines so that industries can operate. It has to invest in the economy so that economy can grow. So fiscal policy is basically about how government manages its income and its expenses for the benefit of the economy. Though it sounds simple, as you get into the layers, it depends on when government wants to spend, when government wants to control spending. Very similar to how you manage your household, right? There are times when we have good amount of income, there is less spending, so we decide to treat ourselves. We try to do something different. But then there are times when we know, oh, we need to have a stricter budget for the next month. Expenses need to be kept tight. So similarly, government has to plan for the country, right? So that is fiscal policy. Let's look into the types of fiscal policy. Neutral, discretionary. Neutral policy is when whatever government earns by way of taxes, it spends for the economy. That is giving, there is no excess spending or no underspending, right? This is generally a very rare case, but this is also to be understood. Discretionary. This is a more rampant, this is a more used form of expenditure. Excuse me. This is when government decides to spend more than it receives by way of taxes, or government decides to underspend. Now, we can't really go into too much layering today, but why would government do either overspend or underspend? Any comments, any thoughts here? Excuse me. So there are different things. Inflation. We recently read in the newspaper about how inflation is not at the level government is expecting. What does that mean? Excuse me, class. The government wants people to spend more, consume more. Only when there is more spending, there is boost in the economy. Industries or firms will earn more. There's more income. There is more income by way of taxes to the government. So based on how the government wants the economy to function, it will decide whether it needs to spend more or spend lesser. I'll just take a minute's pause here. So now we spoke about government's revenue and expenses. If you look at any company, they have their profit and loss. If you all see, the companies issue financial statements each year, right? What is a financial statement? It tells you how much a company has earned and how much a company has spent. Similarly, if the government spends, receives money, there should be some accountability, correct? There should be a financial blueprint to that. This is achieved by way of government budget. Now, government budget is not just another task of the government. This is a constitutional requirement. There has to be some formal document which tells you how much government is collecting by way of taxes and how much government is spending, right? So government has to present this. Every year, the finance minister will present before both houses of the parliament a statement of receipts and expenditures for the ensuing financial year. A financial year generally runs from 1st of April to 31st of March. Excuse me, class. Excuse me. So this is called the budget. A budget is very important part of the government's because it gives you accountability. A government has to provide accountability for where it spends, which sectors it spends, where there is real need at grassroots level, at rural level, what needs to contribute to the growth of the economy. So all this needs to be laid out by way of a budget, which is presented every year. Now, this budget is a huge process in itself, how it's being presented, what are the stages, who does it. All of that is a topic in itself, but it's important to understand in the context of fiscal policy that a budget has to be presented. Types of budget. You have revenue and capital budget. So there are, as we get into the details, there are many other types of government budget, but broadly to understand, revenue means transactions in the next 12 months. Capital budget is more long term. Excuse me. So if the government decides to do certain activities for the economy over the next 12 months, that's called a revenue budget. Let's now classify this into receipts and expenditure. Revenue receipts. Whatever government earns over the next 12 months, it estimates to receive are called revenue receipts. the chunk or the majority of government's revenue comes by way of taxes. What are taxes? We discussed earlier, personal taxes, your personal income tax that you pay to the government, whatever you pay for the purchases you make, whatever is being sold in the economy, services, you hire a lawyer, you go to a doctor, whatever services are being rendered and you pay for that also attributes to taxes. Non-tax revenues. These are in the form of passport fees, court fees, licenses. Now, when you have to go for passport renewal, you go to the government passport seva office, right? All that are forms of non-tax revenues. Revenue expenditure. Now, these are important terms to note here. Plan versus non-plan. What is plan? As the name suggests, plan is something that you specifically design for this year's budget. For example, some examples of revenue expenditure. Government wants to set up primary healthcare centers in all the rural areas. Or they identify certain cities that need to be developed into smart cities. So they invest in such cities, such projects. So there could be revenue expenditure. What are revenue expenditures? You have a primary education center that you set up in a particular city. You have to pay salaries for the teachers, right? You have to take care of the maintenance expenses. All those are planned revenue expenditure. What is non-plan? You don't have to specifically plan for it in your budget because these are recurring expenses. These are expenses that you incur year on year. For example, you pay salaries for government staff. Every year you need to pay. You pay subsidies, right? You give grants. You give certain benefits to states if they, there are more agricultural activities. You give agricultural subsidies. So these don't have to be planned for. They are recurring revenue expenditure. Capital. Capital is more long term. Examples of receipts. For example, government operates a lot of the public sector undertakings. It also has investments. So whatever government, for example, government decides to fund a public unit, and later on, now when it is in need of money, it recovers the money it has funded. So when it recovers those loans, it's a receipt for them, right? So it depends. They will handle their liquidity or their cash based on whether the project needs have been met. The public sector is in a position to repay the loans. Borrowings. Government can borrow from RBI. It can borrow from domestic units itself. It can operate. It can borrow from small savings funds. It can borrow from abroad. Disinvestment, like we earlier spoke of, if the government has invested in a particular project, it feels the project has met its purpose, it withdraws, or somebody else claims a stake. These are examples. We can go into further detail, but this is just to give you an outlay of the kinds of receipts. Similar to revenue expenditure, capital expenditure can also be classified into plan and non-plan. What is plan? Plan is something that you lay out in your budget. For example, construction of railway network. You want to, expand the metro. For example, we have metro projects going on in the city now. So you want to expand that project. You need to plan for that, right? And then you decide to make certain, government also borrows. So when it has to repay its loans, right? Those are all, sorry, when the government has to repay its loans, if it is, again, it can be cut into two here. If it is part of the usual repayment cycle, it's a non-plan expenditure because it's not planned for. Whereas planned capital expenditure, the government decides to fund some project now, so it decides to repay the loan, so there is more cash outflow, they are able to sustain. That is a planned capital expenditure. So these are the different types of expenses and revenues. We can get into more detail. We can take examples from just our day-to-day reading of the newspaper. but it helps you understand how the government budget operates. This is kind of our last topic on fiscal policy before we move on to our next one. What is the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy? Fiscal policy tells you how the government spends and receives money. We just spoke about how it earns revenue by way of taxes and how it decides to spend for different initiatives that it wants to undertake. So this is mostly set by executive and legislative functions. What do we mean by that? We just spoke about how budget is presented by the finance minister before the two houses of parliament. So this goes through all the executive, the legislative functions, all the members of parliament and everybody, right? What is monetary policy? Monetary policy is about how you want to either increase the supply of money or reduce the supply of money in the economy. This is determined by RBI. Now let's take an example to understand this better, right? Fiscal policy. Most of you would have read that the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So basically, without getting into too much details, this act was replaced by the Viksit Bharat Act. What is this trying to do? This is an example of fiscal policy. What is happening here? They replaced the existing scheme with another scheme because the new scheme meant more days of employment to rural workers. It meant there'll be more infrastructure that will be created. There will be more livelihood opportunities for rural people, right? They can build a better society. So now when government takes initiatives like these to improve the quality of life or to do something that boosts the economy or to create a more stable economy, that's an example of fiscal policy. What is monetary policy? Now, take a very layman example. Inflation is very high. When does inflation okay, that's a concept in its own, but just to understand in layman's language, when there's a lot of money in the hands of people, but the government decides we need to control the supply of money, what did the government do? They introduced the demonetization concept, right? They wanted to reduce that was for a different purpose to bring everything under legal money. But another example would be the government RBI can take steps like increasing interest rates. When interest rates are high, people don't want to take loans, correct? Because they wait for the interest rates to reduce and then take a housing loan or a car loan or whatever. So by this system, the central bank is able to influence the amount or the supply of money in the economy, whether they want consumers to pay or they want consumers to contract their spending, right? So this is the difference between fiscal and monetary policy, and it's a subject in its own. It requires detailed study, but this is just to give you a basic understanding of the differences between the two. With that, we'll move to the next topic that I wanted to cover for today, national income accounting. I'll pause here for a few seconds. If anybody has any questions so far, would like to say something. Okay, can I take that as a yes to proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. National income accounting, another giant topic. We all read about GDP, so now different people are being resourceful, different firms are being resourceful for the economy, right? You start a small business, you make money. There are big enterprises, there are big industries. Now, how do you calculate what is the total income of the country, right? You're able to measure the income of companies. They report through their financial statements. Households, okay, this has been the income we earned for this month. Father earns so much, mother earns so much. Um, what is the total income and what has been the spending? So, okay, we have saved this much for the month. But the country also has to do that, right? So how do you measure national income for the full country? That is what we're going to talk about now. Before we talk about how we compute, we need to understand certain concepts, like basic concepts. We will talk about 2 to 3 concepts about the economy, and then we will connect all of them in the context of national income. First, let's understand that for any country, if you read an article about these are the top 10 countries of the world, how do they know that that a particular country is doing well, right? How is the economic wealth or well-being of a country measured? So these are seen as the common meters, but of course there are many more which we'll discuss. Generally, it depends on how much of natural resources the country possesses and how it uses those resources in generating flow of production, right? Let's take an example to understand this. There is a country called Democratic Republic of Congo. This is a country, the largest country in Central Africa. Now, what is with this country? It has very rich natural resources, right? It's rich in gold, diamonds, copper, cobalt, and then it has lands that are suitable for agriculture. It is a it's rich in natural resources. But is it doing well as a country? No. If you look at look at a list of the poorest countries in the world, this is called one of the poorest countries in the world. What happened here? It has natural resources, but why is it not an economically well-to-do country? Because of the way it used its resources. There is high political instability in the country. There are conflicts within, there are governance issues. So when when the government is constantly fighting, it doesn't know how to use its resources. Now, you can as well convert those resources. You can you can cultivate crops. You can sell it to the rest of the world. But when the government is not taking any of those initiatives, it's constantly fighting. There is politics. The government doesn't know how to deal with it. Government doesn't have a good management system. What happens? There is failure, right? Take another example. In contrast, let's take Japan. We all know it's one of the technological leaders. They are really, any technological advancement almost comes from them, right? But if you look at their share of natural resources, they hardly have agricultural lands, scarce agricultural lands. Do they have enough, do they have oil? No, very little oil, hardly any natural resources. But how are they a super economic or a superpower, or how is the economy doing so well? Because they're able to translate. They have a very good industrial base. They invest heavily in technology. They have a very efficient workforce, right? Now, what happens when they're able to produce goods? They understand the consumer market. They're able to get work done quickly. They're able to invest in, now we have AI. So what if they invested so much in technology? You're able to become a superpower. So both of these go hand in hand, or at least it's about how the country manages its resources or manages its limited resources to generate a flow of production. With that, let's move into kinds of contributions. I'll take a quick pause here. So now to produce goods, you need people, correct? Even if you were to start a small business, if you wanted to sell, say, accessories or household goods, you wanted to create a, you wanted to set up a, you want to set up a small business, you need people, right? Who will rally around, who will make for you, who will make the products or who will help sell, right? You need capital. Either you could be self-funded, you could have funds, or you need loan. So and then you have owners of the business, right? Who take risk, who invest in the business. And then you need to operate from somewhere, right? Of course, there are e-businesses too. But if you take, they also have their cost of operating. Or if you take a building, you lease a property, you lease a building, and then you start a business there. So these are all called factors of production, right? These are all needed to generate a flow of production. What is the contribution that you in turn pay? You pay them in the form of remuneration, interest, profit, rent, all of this, right? So this is important to understand because we will see this term being used as we go about understanding national income accounting. So they are called factors of production. These factors of production help you make your profits, help you run the business, help you generate income for the country, for the economy, right? Excuse me. Now let's move with what we've understood to concept of GDP, gross domestic product. This is what we keep reading about, right? India's GDP is estimated. Even today, there was an article in the paper about how they've increased the estimate of India's GDP from 6.6 to 7.3. The GDP, if you were to understand this concept, it is the total monetary value of all the goods, final goods and services produced within the country during a year. All the terms that are underlined have significance, but we'll talk about it at more length in our classes. Just to understand this, just like you measure your household income, a company measures its income, country also has to measure its income. That is measured by way of gross domestic product. If you took the value of all the goods and services produced in the country, you will arrive at GDP, right? There are three ways to calculate, and to understand this, there is more depth to each of these methods, which again we'll cover in our classes, but at least for now, to get a hang of what these terms mean, let's talk about it. But bottom line is that all these three methods should give you the same answer, more or less the same answer in a perfect economy. Value added or product method. This means we're going to follow this up with an example where you'll understand each of these methods, but just to get a theoretical understanding, value added means, for example, you have yarn which is getting converted into cloth, which then gets converted into garments and all of that, right? You have, for any product, for any final product, okay, tea. If there's a restaurant that's selling tea, it starts with tea leaves being produced. That tea leaves, those need to be brewed, and then somebody has to create a decor and create a restaurant and then sell it, right? So for any product, there are different stages it has to go through. So if you calculate the value of the product at every stage, just the value they add, and you sum up that value across the different processes it goes through, that's how you'll arrive at GDP. That's the first method. Second method, expenditure. This is, instead of looking at it from the point of view of selling, you look at it from the point of view of buying, right? You, for example, let's take the example of a clothes store, right? When you calculate how much they sell, that is from a seller's point of view. Buyer's point of view, you know how much you have billed each customer, correct? Take the bills for 1 month. You will know how much the consumers have consumed from your store. That is expenditure method. What is the final spending that the firms receive for their goods? Instead of looking at their balance sheet and their P&L to see how much income they've earned, you look at all the bills. Ultimately, that's what goes into their accounting. But you understand how much consumers have spent for their goods, right? That is expenditure method. Income method. We just spoke in the previous slide about factors of factors contributing to your production, right? Now, whatever payments you make to those factors of production, right, in the form of wages, salaries, we just spoke about rent and all of that. If you add it in a perfect economy, it's assumed that whatever you earn, right, you spend in meeting your rent, your wages, and then a portion is retained by way of profits. So when you look at it as a circular flow of income, this income method basically tells you to take the incomes of all those factors, like add up the wages that contributed to making your products, your interest, your profits, and your rent. You add all that, you will arrive at GDP by income method. So basically, all these three should give you the same answer. Let's look at that. We'll take an example here, a more detailed example. A farmer, right, has a piece of land. He grows wheat on his land. The wheat produce is then sold to a flour mill. Okay, the flour mill takes the wheat, makes flour out of it, and sells it to a baker. Baker takes the flour, makes bread out of it, sells it to wholesaler. What does wholesaler do? He sells it in bulk to a retailer, Retailer, what does he do? He sells it in limited quantities, or basically he puts it into smaller quantities. You can buy one loaf, you can buy two loaves, whatever, to the end customer, correct? So this is the cycle we are taking as an example. Now, for a farmer, let's look at now, this is the entire process that a loaf of bread takes, right? From the farmer to the retailer, right? At a farmer stage, what happens? He has to get his field ready. He has to cultivate the crop. He has to water it. He has to put pesticides, whatever he does to convert that the land into something productive, right? Out of the land, he's going to convert it into wheat because he's sown seeds for that. So he's going to, what is his value addition? He is giving wheat. So whatever implements, whatever machinery, equipment he uses to convert just that soil into a productive crop is his process addition. Profits that he earns when he sells to the flour mill, these are all just for an example, say 50 rupees. So total output here is 100, right? That then becomes the input for the flour mill, right? In this value addition method, we will just look at the value addition at every stage. The value addition at a farmer stage is just 50 plus 50. That's what I've added here. Now it goes to the flour mill. What does the flour mill do? They take all of the wheat, they have their flour, they have their machine that churns it and produces flour out of it. So they have their investment in equipment, they have their own laborers, everybody, right? And then they sell it at a profit of 40 rupees to baker. This 60 plus 40 is then the value addition at a flour mill's stage. Baker, what does he do? He again has to, he takes the flour and then he has to make bread out of it. He has his own technology, the way he makes bread out of it. He has his own process addition, sells it at a profit of 30 rupees to the wholesaler. In turn, the same thing the wholesaler does to retailer. So all of this section here that's shown in bold is basically a value addition. I'm adding all the amounts here below to arrive at the GDP or the total value of bread by taking value addition at every step of the process, right? And you get INR 400. Let's now move to the second method of calculation. Expenditure method. What is expenditure method? Finally, who consumes it? Your consumer, right? We go to a store, we go to a provision store, we ask them, can you give me a loaf of bread? Okay. Or a business wants to make sandwiches. It buys from a retailer and it makes, so the final consumer is what we need to, is the point of view we're going to take here for expenditure method. So we're not going to take any of these steps. Finally, the retailer, he has his own inputs, 350 rupees of input. He puts his own process addition. He sells it at a profit of 20. So finally, the sale value is 400 rupees, right? For his end product. This cannot be the cost of a loaf of bread. Let's take 10 loaves of bread, right? For 10 loaves of bread, he's charging 400 rupees. Now, the end consumer goes and buys this for his sandwich making business, right? So this final expenditure by the end consumer is seen as the value of GDP as per expenditure method. The important point here is to not consider intermediate goods. We'll talk about intermediate goods as a separate topic, what they mean, but basically understand that we will not touch any of the other processes that contribute to this. Expenditure just means the final consumer, how much he pays. And there is a formula that goes with this. In the broader perspective of the economy, you consider consumption expenditure, investment, but that's for a more detailed example. In this simple example, it's just consumption expenditure, and that is 400 rupees. So as we see, this equals the value addition method that we saw in the previous slide. Finally, using income method. What is income method? We're going to break this example further down. Now for this process addition, right, we saw farmer 50. So if we break this down, say he has two informal laborers on his field who help him cultivate the crops, take the crops out, weed them, everything, right? So he pays wages of 40. He has to take a loan, a farmer's loan or something in order to invest in all the pesticides or whatever he wants to invest for his farm. So that is interest. This together adds up to the process addition. I'm just breaking it down so we understand factors of contribution here. Excuse me. Profit, we've already discussed 50, right? So now if for a business, we break down whatever their value addition is into the factors of production. So whatever they earn, ultimately they are spending by way of wages or interest or retaining as profit, we will arrive at the income method. So using this method, that's what we've done. In the farmer's example, 40 plus 10 plus 50, wages, interest, profit. Add whatever he is paid to his factors of contribution, and you will still arrive at the GDP, INR 400. So in a very classic example, all the three methods should give you the same answer, right? So these are the stipulated methods by the governmental agencies to calculate GDP for the country. Little more into the technical side. National Statistical Office of Government of India, they are assigned. So somebody has to undertake this, right? They will collect statistics. They will gather data for the entire country and they will calculate GDP. When we say GDP, this is the office that does this, right? They have changed. Now we just saw GDP, but then there are methods at which you can calculate GDP at market prices. Earlier it was at factor cost. So factor cost is nothing but the factors of production we saw. We can get into the details in subsequently, but basically this organization, right, this governmental agency, NSO, is responsible for producing data, and they use GDP at market prices. That is what is being used to calculate GDP. Now, how is GDP at market prices calculated? You take the gross value added we used in the previous method at factor cost, that is whatever basic cost you've incurred, and then you add two components here. This is what is kind of the highlight of this page: net production taxes and net product taxes, to arrive at market price. What are production taxes? As the name suggests, if you want to set up a business, right, you need to, for example, I'm leasing a building or I'm taking a building on rent, a property or a small space on rent to start a business. Now, even if I have to operate there, there are certain registration formalities, there are certain things that I have to do. This has nothing to do with your production, but to start your business, you need to complete certain formalities to set up your business, right? You need to get compliances done. So whatever taxes you incur with respect to production or basically setting up of your production are called production taxes. If you owned your own space, you have to pay land revenue, stamp registration fee every year, right? All that you pay attributes to production taxes. What are product taxes? Product, they move in line with the product. For example, GST. In every bill of purchase, you see GST is being marked. So with every unit you sell, you need to pay GST. So this depends, or this moves in proportion to your goods. If you're selling 100 goods, 100 into rate of tax will apply. If you're selling 200, 200 into rate of tax, correct? So this moves in line with your sale. So that's the difference. But again, this is to be discussed at more length, which we will do. Excuse me. Final topic before we kind of sum up an introduction to national income: potential GDP. This is also asked in the UPSC exams. Potential GDP tells you sustainable. You can also see it as sustainable GDP. If we were to calculate GDP over a longer period of time, say I'm able to invest in all the technological changes in the next 5 years. The regulatory changes, I have to withstand whatever changes they make. For example, they tell you need to manufacture energy efficient vehicles, right? You need to be able to get labor, right? Availability of labor. So I'm able to tackle all my issues and still be able to produce at this rate or at a higher rate. That's called potential GDP. It measures the highest level of output an economy can sustain over a period of time, assuming inflation to be constant. Inflation and other factors and all still play with how a business operates, but ignoring all of that, will you still be able to sustain? That's called potential GDP. So these are some of the concepts I wanted to cover with national income, just to give you a flavor of what fiscal policy means, what national income means. With that, I'll take a pause. I want to finally discuss prior year questions, because all that we've discussed now have been tested in either UPSC prelims or mains. So it'll just give you a flavor about how what we discuss really translates into exams, and then I will leave it to questions that any of you have or anything you'd like to discuss. This is one of the questions about national income accounting. Of course, we need to go in more depth, but from what we've studied so far, term national income represents, there is a definition for national income. It needs to be calculated at net national product at factor cost. That's your national income, right? You need to add few items to GDP, reduce few items. We'll be looking at a thorough and a more detailed analysis of that. We just saw some basics in our earlier slides. So to arrive at that, they say it's option C. Why is that? Gross national product, right? Less depreciation is nothing but net national product. Now, this is at market prices. We saw just in a couple of slides back, you need to reduce from factor cost, or you need to add certain product taxes and production taxes to arrive at market prices. So to arrive at net national product at factor cost, you would have to reduce all your taxes, right, to arrive at factor cost. So that this is how you kind of dissect. If you have an understanding of what the formula is, this is a question that you can crack. We talked about this 3 methods of national income accounting, correct? We saw the value-added method. We saw the expenditure method. We quickly talked about it, but then this comes from that. Consumption expenditure, investment, government expenditure, net exports. That's how you will calculate value added using expenditure method. These are questions tested in mains, more descriptive, right? Explain the difference between computing methodology of India's GDP before 50 and year 50. Again, we briefly talked about it. We can write in more depth. We need to analyze in more depth. But basically, like I told you in one of our slides, GDP now needs to be calculated at market prices, right? Earlier, it was at factor cost. So that was the main change. Of course, we need to talk about why they decided to take that stance to move from factor cost to market price. That's a detailed discussion. And once you understand that, answering this it becomes simple. Define potential GDP. This is what we just discussed at the end, right? Explain its determinants. But just from the very basic analysis we have done, the factors inhibiting India from realizing its potential GDP. First, you need to define potential GDP. We saw the determinants, the regulatory framework. There should be full employment. And then you should be able to withstand technological changes. Then we will look at how specifically India has been able to achieve or not been able to achieve. What's inhibiting India? Have we had that amount of technological growth? How has the employment market behaved? When we talk about all of that, you'll be able to answer how India has either realized or not realized potential GDP. Fiscal policy, which of the following are non-plan expenditures of Government of India? We spoke about plan and non-plan, correct, in a detailed slide. So non-plan are those that are not specifically planned for. These are recurring expenditure. Now here they've given some options for us: defense, subsidies, all expenditures linked with prior plan periods, interest payments. Now if you see, all of this are incurred by government year after year. The third one basically tells you whatever you incurred in the prior period, you're incurring this year as well. So these are all non-plan expenditures. So when you then have to analyze what your options are, so this is basically all the 4 are non-plan because they recur or they have to be undertaken year after the other. Economic survey, we have a separate topic about what economic survey means. It's issued by the Ministry of Finance. We quickly touched upon this topic, but basically, how does government borrow, right? What are the components of internal debt? Government borrows from RBI, government borrows internally, borrows from foreign sources. So these are different instruments government uses. So once we understand these instruments, it will be easy for you to kind of understand what internal debt means. This is a more detailed question, government budgeting, but we spoke about it. Distinguish between capital budget and revenue budget. Explain the components of both these budgets. So now you know what are the components, what are planned, what are non-planned, what is what are some of the examples to elaborate on both. So with that, I kind of summarize today's presentation. Really appreciate and thank you for your time. I'll now pause for any questions, any thoughts. Any questions you want to post in the chat box, I can take that as well. I'll maybe give a minute here for anybody to raise any questions. Was it all something that you could understand? Did it seem relatable to day-to-day concepts? Any feedback, anything on the chat? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I would see this as a journey together. We are in this together to crack it. For all your, I know all of you want to become civil service officers, so we will work together to achieve your goal. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to this journey together. Thank you so much. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.